Soft, soothing music begins as a dimly lit room comes into view, shadows dancing along the walls. The camera slowly zooms in on an old, weathered book lying on a dusty table, its pages fluttering open as if someone unseen had just turned them. The whispers began the night Harold Carrington disappeared. They said the truth would never be uncovered. But the truth was buried deep, beneath a pact made long ago. And now, the last heir stands at the edge of a fate darker than the shadows around her. The music fades into a slow, eerie lullaby as the screen goes black. As the screen fades from black, soft, inviting music plays, leading into a calm and warm voice. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You won't want to miss the secrets waiting to be uncovered. Stay with us until the very end, and remember, the darkest truths often come with the gentlest whispers. Chapter 1. A Midnight Visitor. It was a bitterly cold night in London, the kind where the fog clung to the streets like a blanket, muting the sounds of the city into a hushed, eerie silence. The clock in the corner of 221B Baker Street struck 12 with a slow, deliberate chime, each toll echoing through the room like the ticking of some unseen, relentless machine. I sat in the comfortable armchair, a book open before me, though my thoughts were far from its pages. Holmes, ever the enigma, sat at the far end of the room, his piercing gaze flicking from one paper to the next, as if searching for answers hidden within the ink and words that seemed so mundane to me. He was deep in thought, his sharp features illuminated only by the flickering light of the fire. The room smelled of tobacco and old books, a familiar scent that had long since lost its charm for me. Holmes, however, seemed unbothered, as always by the weight of the evening. His mind was elsewhere, unraveling the puzzles of the world, while the rest of us tried to make sense of our own little corners. It was then that the knock came, a soft, almost hesitant tap on the door. It broke the stillness of the night, like a small pebble dropped into a pond, rippling outward with a sudden intensity. I glanced at Holmes, but his eyes were already trained on the door, his mind alert, sensing something out of the ordinary. "Enter," he called, his voice calm as always. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. A woman, her figure cloaked in deep shadows, her face partially obscured by a heavy veil. She was dressed in mourning attire, as though she had been wrapped in grief itself. Her pale hands trembled as she held the edges of her veil, and the faint smell of lavender lingered in the air, a fragrance that seemed oddly out of place in the grim atmosphere of the room. She stepped further into the dim light, and I could see her more clearly now. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and desperation, were locked onto Holmes. There was something haunting about her expression, something that sent a chill through me, despite the warmth of the fire. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I need your help. I don't know who else to turn to." Holmes, ever the picture of calm, did not rise from his chair. He studied her with that keen, unblinking gaze, his mind already assessing every minute detail. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "Tell me what troubles you." The woman hesitated for a moment before sinking into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as though she were trying to hold herself together. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and I could see the pulse at her throat, beating erratically, as though the very act of speaking was costing her something vital. "My name is Eleanor Carrington," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And my brother, Harold, he has disappeared, gone without a trace. No one knows where he is. The police, they cannot find him. And I am hearing things, strange things, whispers in the dark. They come in the night, Mr. Holmes, and they call my name." She paused, her eyes drifting to the floor. "They say things, cryptic things, about my brother, but I cannot understand them fully. And now I fear I am losing my mind." Holmes remained silent, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. He had a way of drawing out the truth from people without saying a word, simply by listening. It was a skill I had come to admire, though I could never fully comprehend how he did it. "You fear for your brother?" he asked, his voice soft, yet laced with that subtle command that made one want to confess everything to him. Eleanor's eyes lifted, and there was a flicker of something else in them now. A glimmer of hope, perhaps, or a desperate plea. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Harold is all I have left. I am an orphan, and he has always been my protector. But now he has vanished, and I fear that something terrible has happened to him." Holmes remained still, his expression unreadable, but his mind was already racing. He leaned forward ever so slightly, as if to invite her to speak more freely. "Tell me about the whispers," he asked, his tone gentle yet insistent. "When did they begin?" Eleanor's hands trembled as she clasped them tighter in her lap. "At first I thought I was imagining it. Late at night I would hear them, just whispers, soft and distant, like voices carried on the wind. They would call my name, and I would wake up, my heart pounding. But when I tried to listen more closely, they would stop, just as suddenly as they had started." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where the fog rolled in thick waves, blurring the view of the world beyond. "But it grew worse," she continued. "The night before Harold disappeared, I heard the whispers more clearly than ever before. They spoke of him, of something terrible he had discovered. And when I woke the next morning, his study was unlocked, though I am certain he would never leave it in such a state." Holmes sat back in his chair, his eyes distant as he processed her words. His mind was already working, the gears of his intellect grinding steadily. "This is not a simple case of a missing person," he murmured, almost to himself. "There is something more at play here, something deeper, something that involves not just your brother, but you as well." Eleanor's face paled at his words, and she looked at him, wide-eyed with fear. "What do you mean, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes smiled faintly, though it was not a smile that offered comfort. "I believe, Miss Carrington, that your brother's disappearance is but the surface of a much darker mystery, and I have no doubt that it is a mystery that will unravel with great consequence, both for you and for him." The room grew colder, and the fire seemed to flicker, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls. Eleanor sat in silence, her face filled with apprehension, while I sat there, watching Holmes with bated breath, knowing that whatever came next would change the course of our lives forever. And in that moment, the whispers of the night seemed to grow louder in my mind, as if echoing the mystery that was about to unfold. Chapter 2. The Missing Brother. The following morning arrived with a dull gray light creeping through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. The air outside was thick with fog, muffling the sounds of the bustling city. But inside 221B Baker Street, the silence was palpable. Holmes had risen early, as he often did, though he appeared less animated than usual. His brow furrowed as he sat at his desk, his eyes scanning the papers, but his thoughts clearly occupied elsewhere. I sat across from him, my morning tea untouched, lost in thought as the previous night's events played over in my mind. Miss Eleanor Carrington had left our home with little more than a whisper of gratitude, her expression clouded with the uncertainty of a woman who knew that she was on the edge of something perilous. As I sipped my tea, I noticed Holmes's gaze still fixed on the stack of papers in front of him. He was thinking in the way only he could, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that had no clear image. He had not spoken a word since Eleanor had left, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a hint of doubt flicker across his usually unshakable demeanor. "The game is afoot, Watson," he said at last, breaking the silence with a voice so calm that it seemed out of place with the storm brewing in his mind. I nodded, setting down my cup. "What do you make of Miss Carrington's story, Holmes?" He leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressed together as he regarded me thoughtfully. "Her story, Watson, is but a single thread in a far more tangled web. The whispers, they are not a mere coincidence, they are a warning. But what they are warning of, we have yet to discover." I could see the wheels turning in his mind, and I knew that his thoughts were moving in the same rapid, circuitous path that they always did when he was faced with a new mystery. After a few moments of silence, Holmes rose from his chair, his sharp eyes alight with purpose. "We shall begin at the scene of the disappearance, the Carrington estate. It is there that we will uncover what is truly at the heart of this enigma." The journey to the Carrington estate was a quiet one, as the fog that had settled over London seemed to envelop us entirely, casting an almost dream-like atmosphere over the city. The horses' hooves clattered against the cobblestones, their sounds muffled by the thick mist. I sat beside Holmes in the carriage, my thoughts occupied by the strange tale of Eleanor's brother, Harold Carrington. The estate itself was not far from the city, nestled in the rolling hills outside of London, a grand mansion that seemed to have been frozen in time. The ivy that crawled up the walls seemed almost alive, creeping slowly, as if it too was a part of the mystery that lingered within. As we approached the gates, I noticed the eerie stillness of the place. No servants moving about, no animals in the yard, just an unsettling silence that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. Holmes did not waste a moment. We were greeted by a butler who led us inside, his face drawn and grim. He was clearly distressed, though he said little as he escorted us through the hallways. As we entered the study, I felt an immediate change in the air, a palpable tension that seemed to rise with each step we took deeper into the house. The study was exactly as Eleanor had described it. Large, with shelves full of dusty books and papers scattered across the desk. But there was something distinctly off about the place. The air felt stale, as though it had not been disturbed in days. And the only light in the room came from the dim glow of the fireplace. Holmes moved about the room with practiced ease, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of the space, his mind already working through the details of the case. He inspected the desk carefully, his fingers lightly tracing the edges of the scattered papers before turning his attention to the open window. There, the faintest traces of dirt marred the ledge, but nothing substantial enough to suggest a break-in. I stood by the door, watching Holmes at work, and it was then that I noticed something peculiar. A slight, almost imperceptible shift in the air. The faintest sound, like a whisper, seemed to rise from the depths of the room, and for a moment, I could have sworn I heard a voice. It was soft, too soft to be understood, but there it was, rising from the shadows. Holmes turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as though he, too, had sensed the disturbance. His face, however, remained calm, a practiced mask that hid the intense focus beneath. He approached the desk and lifted a stack of papers, revealing something beneath. A small, delicate silver locket. It gleamed in the dim light, an object so out of place in this room of forgotten memories. He held it up to the light, his eyes examining it closely. "A locket," he muttered, his voice low and almost to himself. "Not an ordinary piece of jewelry, I suspect. There is more to this than meets the eye." I stepped closer, my curiosity piqued. "What makes you say that, Holmes?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned the locket over in his hands, noting the intricate design, the tiny engravings along its edge. He slipped his fingers into the clasp, and, with a soft click, it opened. Inside, there was no photograph or sentimental token, only a small, folded piece of parchment. Holmes unfolded the note, his eyes scanning it quickly, before he read aloud in a voice barely above a whisper. "The whispers are not a trick. Follow the light, find the key, and the truth shall be revealed." I felt a shiver run down my spine as the words lingered in the room like a strange, cryptic puzzle. "What does it mean?" I asked, though the question seemed almost too trivial in the face of the mystery that was unfolding before us. Holmes's gaze met mine, and for the first time in our acquaintance, I saw a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "It means, Watson, that this case is far from simple. It is not just a missing person we are searching for. It is a truth buried so deep that only the bravest will dare uncover it." We stood in silence, the weight of the mystery pressing down on us, and the room seemed to close in with a soft, suffocating intensity. The whispers, which had been mere hints on the edge of our hearing, now seemed to pulse from the very walls, urging us forward. Holmes looked to the window, where the fog rolled in thick waves, and then to the locket in his hand. "The light, Watson. We must find the light." And with that, we left the study, knowing that the next step of our journey would lead us into the heart of darkness itself. The fog outside thickened, shrouding the estate in a blanket of uncertainty. As we left the house, I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Yet there was a sense of calm, too, a steady certainty that no matter how dark this mystery became, we would follow it to its end. The whispers had begun, and we were only just beginning to hear their call. Chapter 3. The Study. The fog outside had thickened since we arrived at the Carrington estate, its white tendrils creeping along the ground like a living thing, swallowing the world whole. Inside the grand, aging manor, the air was heavy with a stillness that almost seemed to hum. The dim light from the flickering candles cast long shadows across the walls, adding to the sense that something was amiss, something just beyond reach, hiding in the darkness. We walked down the narrow hallways, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that lined the floors. The servants' quarters, we were told, had been left undisturbed for several days, and the faint scent of dust lingered in the air, as though the house had been holding its breath. It felt as though time itself had slowed within these walls, caught in a loop that neither day nor night could break. Holmes was unusually quiet, his mind already working through the clues we had gathered, turning over each one like a delicate puzzle piece, trying to fit them together. I could see the faint glimmer of concentration in his eyes, but his face remained a picture of calm. It was as if he had become one with the very shadows of the house, as if he were waiting for something to reveal itself, something hidden beneath the surface that only he could sense. We arrived at the door to Harold Carrington's study, and Holmes paused before turning the handle. He glanced back at me, his expression unreadable. "I have a feeling, Watson," he said softly, "that this room holds the key to everything." I nodded, though I could not shake the strange sense of foreboding that settled in my chest. The whispers, the locket, Eleanor's distress, it all seemed to lead here, to this place. The door creaked open, and the room was revealed to us, shrouded in shadow and dust, as if it had been untouched for days, perhaps even longer. The study was exactly as Miss Carrington had described it. Spacious, lined with shelves of books that reached from floor to ceiling, their spines worn from years of use. The faint smell of old leather and parchment hung in the air. The desk sat at the far end of the room, papers scattered across its surface in an almost haphazard manner, as though someone had left in a hurry. The only sound in the room was the soft crackle of the fire in the grate, casting a warm glow that flickered and danced on the walls. Holmes stepped forward, his eyes immediately scanning the room with that sharp, calculating gaze of his. His fingers brushed over the edge of the desk, lightly moving a stack of papers aside. He didn't speak, not yet. His silence was a tool in itself, a way of drawing the truth from the very air of the room. I stood back, watching him work, knowing that every movement, every subtle glance was part of his process. He moved slowly, methodically, his eyes darting from one detail to the next. Nothing escaped his notice. The open window caught his attention, and he walked over to it, pushing aside the heavy curtains. The glass was cool to the touch, and as Holmes ran his fingers along the edge of the sill, I could see his brow furrow ever so slightly. He bent down, his eyes scanning the ledge beneath the window, and then, with a careful gesture, he pointed to something faint, a small smear of dirt, barely visible, but enough to suggest that the window had been opened recently. "This window," Holmes murmured almost to himself, "was opened after the last rain. But what does that tell us? Someone entered, or perhaps left through here." His voice was steady, calm, yet the undercurrent of something more ominous was there. I could feel it too, that gnawing sensation in the pit of my stomach, the sensation that we were on the edge of something far more sinister than we could have imagined. Holmes didn't stop there, though. His fingers brushed against the desk once more, and as he moved a pile of papers aside, his eyes caught sight of something else, something that seemed entirely out of place. It was a small, delicate object, partially hidden beneath a cluster of papers. Holmes reached for it with the precision of a surgeon, his fingers curling around it gently, as though it might break if he gripped it too tightly. He held it up, and I could see the glint of silver in the dim light. It was a locket, the same one that Eleanor had shown us. though this one seemed slightly different. The engraving was more intricate, the design more refined. Holmes turned it over in his hands, his eyes narrowing as he studied it. "This is interesting," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Very interesting indeed." I stepped closer, curious. "What is it, Holmes?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully pried open the clasp of the locket, revealing what lay inside. My heart skipped a beat as I saw what was there. There was no photograph, no memento of sentimental value, only a small, folded piece of parchment, tucked neatly inside. Holmes unfolded the note with delicate care, his fingers lingering on the paper as though it might reveal something more than just words. He read aloud in his usual low, measured voice. "The whispers are not a trick. Follow the light, find the key, and the truth shall be revealed." The words hung in the air between us like a heavy fog. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. I could feel a shiver running down my spine, though I did my best to conceal it. Holmes didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the locket, the cryptic message now embedded in his mind like a riddle that refused to be solved. "What does it mean, Holmes?" I asked, my voice low, the weight of the situation pressing in on me. Holmes didn't respond right away. His mind was already whirring, piecing together the information like an intricate puzzle. He turned the locket over in his hands, examining every tiny detail of its design. "It means, Watson," he said slowly, his voice almost a whisper, "that Harold Carrington was not merely involved in some disappearance. This was never about him leaving of his own accord. It was about something far deeper, a secret, hidden beneath layers of deceit and old family ties." I glanced around the room, the shadows seeming to deepen with every passing moment. "You think this is a message? A clue?" Holmes nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. "Indeed, but it is not just a clue, Watson. It is a warning, and it is one that has been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to uncover it." He slipped the locket back into his pocket, his eyes scanning the room once more, as though expecting something, or someone, to reveal itself. The study, which had felt so still before, now felt alive with a quiet tension. I could almost hear the whispers, faint as they were, curling around us like the fog outside, distant, elusive, but always present. "Come, Watson," Holmes said, breaking the silence. "We must press on. There is no time to waste." And with that, we turned to leave the study, the weight of the mystery heavier than ever before. The whispers had begun, and now, it seemed, they were calling us forward. Chapter 4. The Locket's Secret. The dim light of the evening seemed to linger longer than it should have as we made our way back to 221B Baker Street. Holmes had not spoken much since we left the Carrington estate, his mind clearly preoccupied with the strange and cryptic message we had uncovered. The locket, now safely tucked away in his coat pocket, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, an unspoken promise of answers hidden just beyond our reach. As we entered the familiar, comforting confines of our home, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Soft, quiet, as if the entire room were holding its breath. Holmes moved toward his desk, and without a word, set the locket down onto the polished surface. The faint glow of the oil lamp flickered, casting a soft shadow on the walls, as though the room itself was waiting for what would come next. I stood a few paces away, watching him, feeling the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. There was something about this case that felt different. The whispers, the locket, the cryptic message. It was as though we were being led down a path that we could not see, yet we knew we had no choice but to follow. Holmes did not move immediately. He stood there for a moment, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of the locket as though searching for something, some hidden truth that might lie within its delicate design. I could sense the deep concentration in his posture, the way his sharp mind was already at work, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that seemed to be missing far too many pieces. After a long silence, Holmes spoke, his voice steady and calm. "There is something about this locket, Watson, something more than just a trinket. It is not the type of object one would casually carry, nor would it be left behind so carelessly. No, this locket was meant to be found, and its message was meant to be understood." I could not help but feel a sense of unease, though Holmes's voice was soothing in its certainty. There was something unnerving about the way he spoke, his calm demeanor only making the mystery seem even more ominous. "What do you think it means, Holmes?" I asked, my voice low, hesitant. I could feel the tension in the air between us, as though the answer to this riddle would unlock something far darker than we were prepared for. Holmes didn't respond immediately. He took the locket in his hand once more, his fingers deftly working to pry it open. The faintest of clicks sounded, and the small clasp fell open, revealing the delicate parchment hidden inside. His eyes flickered with recognition, but there was no immediate sign of surprise. This was all part of the game for Holmes. He was always several steps ahead, even when I felt as though I were stumbling in the dark. He unfolded the note carefully, his eyes scanning the cryptic words written in elegant, almost practiced handwriting. "The whispers are not a trick. Follow the light, find the key, and the truth shall be revealed. The key lies where shadows and light meet, but beware. The path is not without danger." Holmes paused after reading, his fingers lingering on the edges of the note as though the words themselves were a puzzle he had yet to solve. He read the message again, his brow furrowing slightly as he processed the meaning behind the cryptic instructions. "The key lies where shadows and light meet," Holmes murmured to himself. "A place of balance, a place of contradiction. But what does it mean, Watson? What is this key, and how does it tie to Harold Carrington's disappearance?" I stepped closer, my mind racing with questions, my thoughts swirling in 100 different directions. "You think this is connected to his disappearance?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Holmes had an uncanny ability to connect the most disparate details into a cohesive whole, and I trusted that he would soon unravel the mystery before us. Holmes didn't immediately answer. Instead, he set the note aside and took up the locket once more, examining it carefully. His eyes traced the intricate engraving on the back, noting the fine craftsmanship of the piece. There was something deliberate about the way it had been made, something purposeful. "This locket," Holmes said slowly, almost to himself, "was not made by just any craftsman. This is a rare design, Watson, one that has been used for generations by a very specific group, one that deals in secrets and hidden knowledge." I looked at him, puzzled. "Who could it be, Holmes?" Holmes's gaze was distant, his mind already piecing together the clues. "The family who crafted this locket, Watson, is not just any family. They were known for their involvement in certain, shall we say, unconventional activities. The Carringtons, I suspect, have ties to a much older, darker legacy than we initially believed, and this locket is a symbol of that. I could feel my pulse quicken at his words, the weight of the revelation settling heavily in the pit of my stomach. The Carringtons were not just a family of high society. They were entangled in something far more sinister. The thought made the air feel thicker, colder, as though the very room were holding its breath in anticipation. Holmes stood, a sudden intensity in his gaze as he turned toward me. "We must return to the Carrington estate. There is something there, Watson, something hidden beneath the surface that I now believe will reveal the truth. The key lies where shadows and light meet. But where? Where could it be?" I could feel the tension in the air, the mystery thickening like the fog outside. Holmes's words were like a call to action, and though the path ahead seemed fraught with danger, I knew there was no turning back. The journey back to the Carrington estate was a quiet one, each of us lost in our thoughts. The fog seemed to follow us, clinging to the carriage like a living presence. As we neared the grand house, I could see that the once stately walls now appeared almost sinister, their outline barely visible through the heavy mist. Holmes's mind, however, was elsewhere, already planning his next steps, already tracing the shadows and light in his mind. "The key lies where shadows and light meet," he repeated to himself, his voice barely audible. We arrived at the estate, and the doors creaked open with a soft groan as we stepped inside. The house, silent as ever, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for us to uncover its secrets. Holmes led the way through the darkened halls, his footsteps echoing softly in the silence. He paused at the entrance to the study, his eyes narrowing. "Here," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "The shadows and light meet here. Watson, I believe we are close." And as the door to the study creaked open, I felt a sense of inevitability settle over me. We had come to the heart of the mystery, and whatever lay inside, I knew it would change everything. The shadows and light collided within the study, the flickering of the fire, casting long, strange shapes against the walls. I could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense that the truth was just within reach, but it was up to us to find it. Holmes moved toward the desk, his eyes scanning the room with that same intense focus. His hand brushed over the surface, moving papers aside as he searched for something, anything, that would lead us to the key. Then, with a sudden, deliberate motion, Holmes stopped. His fingers rested on a small, hidden compartment beneath the desk. "The key," he murmured. "It was here all along." The compartment opened with a soft click, revealing something small, silver, and gleaming in the dim light. I could only watch in awe as Holmes reached forward, his hand trembling ever so slightly as he lifted the object. And in that moment, I knew the mystery was about to unfold in ways we had never imagined. The key had been found, and with it, the truth was about to be revealed. Chapter 5. The Path to the Light. The night had settled deeper into its embrace as we stood in the dimly lit study, the shadows stretching long against the walls, the fire flickering weakly in the grate. The air inside the Carrington estate felt heavier now, as though the very house was aware of the path we were about to take. The silence in the room was thick, palpable, a quiet before the storm. Holmes held the small silver key in his hand, its surface gleaming in the firelight. He turned it over, inspecting it carefully, as though it contained some hidden message. a secret meant only for him. I stood by the desk, my gaze fixed on the key, my mind racing. The locket, the cryptic message, and now this key. It was all beginning to fit together like pieces of a puzzle I had yet to fully comprehend. "Holmes," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "What does this key unlock? And how does it relate to the message? Follow the light, find the key, and the truth shall be revealed." Holmes didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the key, his expression unreadable. It was as though the answer was already within his grasp, but he was waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Finally, he slipped the key into his coat pocket, his fingers lingering there for just a moment longer than necessary. "Watson," he said, his voice calm but charged with an intensity that I could feel in the very air around us. "I believe we are on the edge of something much larger than we first imagined. The key. It is not just an object. It is a guide, a signal that we must follow. The message is clear. Follow the light. But where does that light lead? We must find the place where shadows and light meet." I stood still, my heart quickening as I took in his words. "You think this light is a literal location? Some sort of beacon or signal?" Holmes looked up from the fire and met my gaze. "Exactly, Watson. A beacon. The message spoke of light and shadows. Meeting. A place where one can find clarity amid confusion. The path is illuminated, but we must have the courage to follow it." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air, thick with anticipation. My mind began to race. I thought of the study, of the Carrington estate, and the strange sense of foreboding that had accompanied us from the moment we first arrived. What was the light? What was it that we were supposed to find? Without another word, Holmes turned toward the door, motioning for me to follow. We stepped out of the study, and the house seemed to close in around us. The grand hallway stretched out before us, a long corridor shrouded in half-darkness, the faint flicker of candlelight casting fleeting shadows on the walls. The house, so quiet before, now felt alive with possibility. Every room, every corner, a potential key to unraveling the mystery that had consumed us. We moved silently through the mansion, each step echoing in the stillness, until we reached the grand staircase. Holmes paused at the base of the stairs, his eyes scanning the room before he turned to me. "There is a place in this house, Watson," he said softly, "where the light and shadows converge. I believe it lies beyond the place most will overlook. The answer lies in the garden." I felt a shiver run down my spine at his words. The garden? It was hidden beneath the heavy mist outside, the fog blanketing everything in an ethereal, almost otherworldly stillness. Holmes had said before that the house itself held secrets. Could the garden truly be the place where the light and shadows met? "Follow the light," Holmes repeated, more to himself than to me. It is time we uncovered the truth. We exited the house, stepping into the cold night air. The garden before us was barely visible, the thick fog curling through the trees and over the stone paths. The world beyond the estate seemed to vanish into the mist, and for a moment, it felt as though we were walking through a dream. Holmes led the way, his steps purposeful, though the path ahead was unclear. The garden, with its overgrown hedges and twisting paths, seemed almost alive, the shadows shifting beneath the mist as if the very earth itself were concealing something deep beneath the surface. The only sound was the soft crunch of our footsteps on the gravel path, breaking the stillness that seemed to stretch forever. We walked deeper into the garden, the world around us growing darker with each step. It felt as though the fog was closing in on us, wrapping around us like a shroud. But Holmes remained undeterred. His eyes, sharp as ever, were scanning the ground, looking for something that was hidden in plain sight. "Holmes?" I asked quietly. "What exactly are we searching for?" He did not answer immediately, his gaze focused ahead. Then, just as I thought he would remain silent, he spoke. "The light, Watson. We are looking for the place where shadows and light meet. It will not be marked by any ordinary sign, but rather by a subtle shift in the environment. A place that, when illuminated, reveals the truth. We are close." A chill ran through me at his words, and I glanced around nervously. There was something unnerving about the garden. Its beauty was overshadowed by an unspoken tension. The longer we walked, the more I could feel the weight of the mystery pressing in on me, a force that seemed to have a life of its own. Holmes stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. I followed his gaze, my heart skipping a beat as I saw what he had found. A small lantern hanging from a branch of a twisted oak tree, its light flickering weakly in the dense fog. It was a soft, dim light, but there was something about it that seemed deliberate. The lantern cast long, strange shadows across the garden floor, the light and dark converging at the very spot where Holmes stood. "This," Holmes said softly, "this is the place where shadows and light meet. The lantern is our guide." He stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the lantern. I hesitated, sensing the danger that might lie ahead. But Holmes's resolve was unwavering. He reached up and carefully lifted the lantern from its perch, the soft glow bathing the surrounding area in a faint, golden light. And in that moment, I saw it. Beneath the tree, half hidden in the shadows, was a small wooden door, barely visible against the stone wall. I felt my breath catch in my throat. This was it. This was the key. Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "Watson, I believe we have found what we were looking for." The lantern's light flickered as if in response, casting a soft, golden glow over the door. With a steady hand, Holmes reached for the handle, his fingers brushing against the cool wood. The door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber beyond, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. In that moment, I knew that whatever lay inside would change everything. The path to the truth had been illuminated. The light had led us here, to the heart of the mystery. And as we stepped through the door, we crossed into a world where shadows and light were not just metaphors, but forces that shaped the very fabric of reality. The truth was waiting, and we were about to uncover it. Chapter 6. The Unveiling. The moment we stepped through the wooden door, the atmosphere changed entirely. The air inside the hidden chamber was cool, almost damp, carrying the faintest scent of earth and decay. It was as if the very walls of the house had been holding their breath, waiting for someone to discover this place, this secret room that had been concealed for so long. Holmes stepped into the room first, his silhouette barely visible in the soft, flickering light of the lantern. The door closed behind us with a soft thud, sealing us in. The faint echo of that sound lingered in the stillness, as if the house itself were acknowledging the turning of some unseen page in its long and secretive history. I stood in the doorway, reluctant to cross the threshold fully, feeling a sense of unease wash over me. The room, though not large, seemed filled with shadows, the corners dark and indistinct. The only source of light was the lantern in Holmes's hand, casting a soft, golden glow that barely illuminated the farthest reaches of the chamber. Holmes moved forward without hesitation, his steps confident, purposeful, as if the room had no power to unsettle him. His eyes, sharp as ever, flicked over the room with a meticulousness I had come to expect. There was no sign of any immediate danger, but I could feel the undercurrent of something deeper, something that had been hidden away, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The room itself was a strange blend of old and new, shelves lined with dusty, leather-bound books, their spines faded with age, and several tables cluttered with maps, old documents, and curious objects. But what immediately drew my attention, and surely Holmes's as well, was the large wooden chest in the center of the room. It was an unassuming thing, yet there was an undeniable presence about it. Holmes approached it carefully, his every movement deliberate, the weight of the moment pressing in on us both. I could sense that this was the culmination of everything we had uncovered. The locket, the cryptic message, the whispers in the dark. All of it had led us here. He crouched down beside the chest, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the lid. There was a certain reverence in his touch, as if he were handling something far more delicate than mere wood. I stepped closer, my breath held in anticipation, as Holmes reached for the latch. It clicked open with a soft sigh, the sound oddly final, as if the chest had been waiting for its secret to be revealed. Holmes hesitated for only a moment, his eyes scanning the contents before he lifted the lid fully. Inside, the chest was filled with papers, thick stacks of old, yellowing parchment. But it wasn't the papers that caught my attention immediately. It was the object resting on top of them, a small, ornate box, no larger than a child's hand, and it shimmered faintly in the lantern's glow. Holmes gently lifted the box from the chest, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface. "Watson," he said, his voice low, almost reverent, "this is what we've been searching for." I stepped closer, my eyes widening as I saw it. A small, jewel-encrusted box, its design intricate and ancient-looking. It seemed out of place in a world of shadows and dust, as though it had come from a different time altogether. Holmes carefully set the box on a nearby table, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. "The whispers," I murmured, unable to help myself. This must be what they were warning us about." Holmes didn't answer immediately. He was studying the box intently, as if the very design of it held some secret, some key to unlocking the mysteries we had uncovered. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of silence, he spoke. "This," he said softly, almost as if he were speaking to himself, "is the heart of the mystery. This box, Watson, is not merely a relic of some forgotten past. It is the key to everything, the whispers, the disappearance, and perhaps even the Carrington family's dark legacy." My heart began to race. The tension in the room seemed to escalate, the very air thick with the sense that we were standing on the precipice of something vast, something unknown. "What do you mean, Holmes?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this box?" Holmes lifted the box carefully, his eyes never leaving it. "It's a relic," he said, "but not just any relic. This is a family heirloom, passed down through the generations of the Carringtons. A key, Watson. A key to a secret that no one, not even Miss Carrington, knew about. and I believe it is linked to Harold's disappearance. I felt a chill run through me. Harold Carrington, missing for days, was at the heart of this mystery. But what was the secret he had uncovered? What was this dark legacy that had remained hidden, waiting to be found? Holmes set the box down gently, his fingers brushing against its surface once more. "This box is a message," he said, his voice almost reverent. "And we are about to unlock it." He reached for the small latch that adorned the box, his fingers trembling ever so slightly, as though even he could feel the weight of what was about to happen. With a soft click, the latch gave way, and the box opened. Inside, nestled carefully within a bed of velvet lining, was a single object, an ancient key, its surface worn with age, but still gleaming with an almost ethereal light. The key was unlike any I had ever seen, its design both simple and intricate, with strange markings etched into its metal. Holmes held the key in his hand, his eyes alight with a mixture of awe and realization. "This is it, Watson," he said softly. "This is the key to the Carrington family's secret." The room seemed to grow colder as Holmes turned the key over in his hands, his mind racing with the implications of what we had uncovered. The whispers, the locket, the key, all of it was connected. But to what end? Holmes turned toward me, his expression focused, his voice steady. "We now know that Harold Carrington's disappearance was not a random act. It was not a case of foul play. It was something far darker. This key, Watson, is a symbol of power, a power that the Carrington family has guarded for generations." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in. But what is the secret? What does this key unlock? Holmes's gaze shifted to the door, the shadows of the room seeming to deepen around him. "That, Watson, is what we must discover next. The key is but the first step. The truth, I fear, is even more dangerous than we could have imagined." He turned toward the chest once more, his eyes scanning the contents. "We have uncovered the first piece of the puzzle, but there is more. I am certain of it. The path is clear, Watson. The light has led us here, and now we must follow it to its end." As Holmes placed the key back in the box, his gaze remained fixed on it, his mind already piecing together the next steps of our journey. I could feel it too, the heavy sense that we were on the verge of something much darker, much more dangerous than we had anticipated. The truth was within our grasp, but it was not without cost. The path ahead would not be an easy one, and I could sense that whatever lay ahead would change everything, forever. The chamber felt colder now, its shadows longer. We had crossed a threshold, and there was no turning back. Chapter 7. The Hidden Truth. The soft glow of the lantern flickered in the dim chamber as Holmes carefully set the ornate box back down onto the table. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, thickening with the weight of discovery. It was as if the very walls of the Carrington estate had exhaled a breath they had held for centuries. The key to unlocking the Carrington family's darkest secret was in our hands now. But the mystery was far from over. I could feel it in the air, a quiet tension, as though the house itself was waiting for us to continue. Holmes didn't speak at first. His sharp, calculating gaze remained fixed on the box, though I knew his mind was already racing, sifting through the puzzle pieces that had brought us here. The whispers, the missing brother, the cryptic messages, they were all part of the same intricate web. But what was the truth? What was the hidden power that had been concealed for so long, hidden within the Carrington family's legacy? I stood still, watching Holmes, feeling the mystery grow heavier around us. The fire crackled softly in the grate, the only sound breaking the silence between us. My heart raced, my thoughts swirling in 100 different directions. I wanted answers, but I also feared what those answers might reveal. The closer we came to the truth, the darker the shadows seemed to grow. After a long moment, Holmes finally broke the silence, his voice steady and calm, though I could hear the faintest tremor of excitement beneath it. "Watson, the key we've uncovered, it is not merely a symbol of power, it is a relic of a much older world, one that has been hidden away by the Carringtons for generations. The truth, I fear, is something far darker than we could have imagined." I swallowed, my throat dry as I processed his words. "What are you suggesting, Holmes? What is this secret the Carrington family has been keeping?" Holmes turned to me, his eyes sharp and intense. "The Carringtons are not just a wealthy family, Watson. They are custodians of a dangerous ancient legacy. This key is a part of something much larger, a secret that has been passed down through the generations, a power that was never meant to be unearthed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "A power? What kind of power, Holmes?" He glanced down at the box once more, his fingers lightly grazing its surface. "A power that was buried with the family's ancestors, a power tied to the very foundation of their wealth and influence. And now, it seems, that power has awakened." The room seemed to grow colder with each word he spoke, the shadows deepening as if in response to the weight of his revelations. I took a step forward, drawn to the mystery that lay before us. "How do you know this, Holmes?" Holmes's gaze flickered back to the chest where we had found the box. "The answer lies within these walls. We must search deeper, Watson. There are more clues hidden here, and I believe that Harold Carrington, in his search for the truth, uncovered something he was not meant to find. Something that has set this chain of events into motion." I watched as Holmes stood up and began to move around the room, his eyes scanning every surface with that familiar intensity. He was searching for something, though I wasn't sure what. The air in the chamber felt charged, heavy with the anticipation of something about to be revealed. I followed him, my footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. Holmes moved toward a set of ancient-looking bookshelves on the far wall, his fingers trailing over the spines of the dusty volumes. I could hear the faintest rustle of paper as he flipped through the books, his face a study of concentration. "Ah," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he had found something of great importance. "Here it is." I moved closer, my curiosity piqued. Holmes had pulled out a thick, leather-bound tome from the shelf. The book appeared old, very old, with a cover that was cracked and faded with age. He carefully opened it to a page near the back, and I saw that the text was written in an unfamiliar language, filled with strange symbols and markings. The handwriting was elegant, yet filled with an unmistakable sense of urgency. "This," Holmes said, his voice calm yet tinged with an almost reverential awe, "is the key to understanding the Carrington family's secret. This is an account written by one of Harold Carrington's ancestors. It speaks of an ancient ritual, a dark pact made long ago." My heart skipped a beat. "A pact? What kind of pact, Holmes?" Holmes's fingers moved delicately over the page as he translated the text in a low voice. "A pact made in exchange for power. The Carringtons, it seems, were not merely wealthy through their own means. They were entrusted with a secret, a power that could shape the very fabric of the world around them. But it came at a cost. I could feel my pulse quicken as Holmes continued to read aloud, each word more unsettling than the last. The ritual was said to involve the binding of a soul to the land, an ancient, forbidden practice. The Carringtons became the guardians of this power, each generation passing the burden on to the next. But in doing so, they were tied to it, forever bound to the pact they made so long ago. I took a step back, my mind reeling. The Carrington family had made a pact with something dark, something powerful. But what had this power cost them? And what had Harold discovered that had led to his disappearance? Holmes closed the book gently, his expression grave. I believe Harold discovered the truth. He uncovered the ritual and the price the Carringtons had paid for their wealth. And when he did, he became a threat to the family's secret. I fear that his disappearance was no accident. But what does this all mean, Holmes? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What is this power, and how does it affect Miss Carrington? Holmes looked at me, his face a mixture of determination and sorrow. The power is tied to the land, Watson. It has been passed down for generations, but now it is unstable. Harold's search for the truth has set something in motion, something that cannot be undone. I felt the weight of his words settle heavily on me, the magnitude of what we had uncovered crashing down like a wave. The truth was not just a mystery to be solved. It was a curse, a force that had the potential to destroy everything in its path. Holmes moved toward the door, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. We must find Harold, Watson, and we must uncover the full extent of the Carringtons' pact before it's too late. I followed him, my heart heavy with the knowledge that we were no longer just unraveling a family secret. We were stepping into a world where darkness and power intertwined, and where the truth might be far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. As we left the chamber, the shadows seemed to follow us, stretching out from the corners of the room, as if they too were aware of the truth that had been unveiled. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The hidden truth was out, and now we had to face it. Chapter 8. The Final Clue. The night outside had deepened further, the fog rolling across the Carrington estate like a thick blanket, swallowing the world in its embrace. The mansion, once a grand testament to wealth and power, now felt like a silent witness to the secrets it had harbored for so long. Each step I took within its walls seemed to echo in the stillness, as if the house itself was waiting for something to unfold. Holmes had been unusually quiet after our discovery in the hidden chamber. The weight of the truth we had uncovered, the Carrington family's dark legacy, the pact made so long ago, hung heavy in the air. It was clear that we were no longer merely uncovering a mystery. We were facing something far darker, far more dangerous than we had anticipated. We had returned to the main house, the lantern in Holmes's hand casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. The key, the box, and the ancient tome were still with us, each piece of the puzzle slowly falling into place, but the final image remained elusive. Harold Carrington's disappearance, the whispers, the cryptic messages, it all pointed toward something deeper, something we had yet to fully understand. Holmes moved through the corridors with purpose, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the house, every crevice as if seeking the last piece of the puzzle. He was leading us somewhere, though I wasn't sure where. His movements were deliberate, though I could see the tension in his posture, the way his brow furrowed with concentration. "Holmes," I said softly, breaking the silence that had settled over us. "What are we looking for? What's the final clue?" Holmes turned to me, his gaze steady and intense. "We are looking for the place where everything began, Watson. The place where the Carringtons' pact was made, where the power was first unlocked. The final clue, I believe, lies in the very foundation of this house." His words sent a shiver down my spine. The foundation of the house? Was he suggesting that the answer had been beneath our feet all along, hidden in plain sight? "Do you mean the cellar?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I was simply grasping at straws. Holmes nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Precisely. The cellar is where the family's legacy is rooted. It is the place where the pact was forged, and it is where we will find the final piece of the puzzle." We made our way through the mansion's winding corridors, the air growing colder with each step we took. The house seemed to grow quieter, the shadows deepening as if the darkness itself was drawing us in. The lantern's light barely illuminated the path ahead, but Holmes moved with a confidence I could not match. He knew where he was going, and I simply followed, trusting in his guidance, though the unease in my chest only grew stronger. We reached the cellar door, an ancient, creaking thing, its surface worn and weathered by years of neglect. Holmes reached for the handle, and with a soft groan, the door swung open. A rush of cold air met us, and the faint scent of damp earth and decay filled my lungs. The cellar, much like the rest of the house, was cloaked in shadow, but the faint glow of the lantern revealed stone walls lined with shelves of forgotten bottles and crates. Holmes stepped into the cellar, his eyes already scanning the room. His movements were measured, precise, as if he were looking for something that had been deliberately hidden. I followed him down the narrow steps, my heart pounding in my chest, the silence around us thick and oppressive. He stopped in front of an old wooden crate, one that seemed out of place among the others. It was not covered in dust, nor was it left to decay like the others. It was as though someone had recently disturbed it. Holmes knelt down in front of it, his hands deftly pulling aside the lid. Inside, nestled carefully within the crate, was another box. This one smaller and more ornate than the last. The carvings on its surface were intricate, depicting strange symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the lantern's light. It was as if the box itself was alive, pulsing with a strange energy that I could feel vibrating through the air. Holmes reached for the box carefully, his fingers brushing against its surface. He did not open it immediately, but instead turned it over in his hands, examining every detail. "This," he said softly, his voice barely audible in the stillness, "is the final clue, the key to unlocking the last piece of the puzzle." I could feel my breath catch in my throat as I watched him. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for what would come next. Holmes's eyes met mine, and there was something in his gaze, something that told me we were on the verge of discovering something we could never undo. He carefully lifted the box's lid, and the room seemed to hold its breath as the contents were revealed. Inside, wrapped in velvet, was a single object, a small, ancient scroll. The paper was yellowed with age, its edges frayed, as though it had been handled countless times. It was old, but it felt significant, heavy with meaning. The symbols on the scroll matched those on the box, and the air around us seemed to hum with a quiet intensity as Holmes unfurled it. The scroll was covered in writing, symbols and characters that were foreign to me, yet I could sense that each stroke of the pen held a weight far greater than its simple appearance. Holmes read the scroll aloud, his voice low and deliberate. "The pact is sealed. The power is bound to the land. Those who seek the truth shall find it, but at a cost. The keeper of the secret must remain silent, or the power will be lost forever." He paused, his gaze lingering on the final line. "The keeper of the secret," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's always been in the Carrington family, Watson. The power, the legacy. It is theirs to guard, but at what cost?" The air in the cellar seemed to grow colder still as Holmes continued to read. The room, once filled with quiet anticipation, now seemed alive with the weight of centuries-old knowledge, as though the very stone walls were closing in around us. "This power," Holmes said softly, his voice now tinged with the weight of the revelation, "was never meant to be shared. It is a force tied to the land, to the very foundation of the Carringtons' wealth and influence. And now, it seems, Harold Carrington's disappearance was not just the result of his seeking the truth. It was a consequence of the family's pact being broken." I felt my heart race as Holmes folded the scroll carefully, his face grim. Harold uncovered something he was never meant to. He uncovered the secret, and in doing so, he threatened everything the Carringtons had built. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. The truth was finally here, but it was darker and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The Carrington family had built their fortune on a pact with something ancient and dark, and now that secret was out. Holmes turned toward me, his face set in grim determination. "We must find Miss Carrington, Watson. She is the last of her family, and I fear she is in more danger than she realizes." The lantern flickered in his hand, casting long shadows across the room. The final clue had been uncovered, but the danger was far from over. We had crossed a line, and now we had no choice but to follow the truth wherever it led. The path to the truth was clear, but the cost of it was yet to be paid. Chapter 9. The Hidden Chamber. The Carrington estate felt alive with anticipation as Holmes and I made our way from the cellar, our footsteps echoing softly in the hollow corridors. The truth we had uncovered, though deeply unsettling, had only led to more questions, more dangers. The scroll, the final clue, had opened our eyes to the darker history of the Carrington family and the legacy of power they had long since tried to bury. But even with all that we had discovered, we had yet to uncover the most elusive part of the mystery, the hidden chamber, the heart of the Carringtons' secret. Holmes moved with a quiet urgency, his every step measured yet purposeful, as if the house itself was pulling him forward. The shadows, long and stretching, seemed to shift with us, the lantern's light flickering against the stone walls like a beacon guiding us to the unknown. I could sense it too, the weight of something ancient, something buried, waiting to be revealed. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear that the path we were walking was fraught with peril. Each revelation seemed to lead us deeper into the heart of darkness. I followed Holmes down another dark corridor, my footsteps careful but steady. The mansion, once a place of wealth and grandeur, now felt like a labyrinth of hidden truths, each turn and passageway leading us further into its secrets. The air grew thicker as we descended, the musty scent of old wood and stone mingling with the faintest trace of something else. Something that was beginning to feel like an ominous presence. Holmes had stopped at a door I had not noticed before. It was older than the rest of the house, its wood worn with age, its surface cracked and faded. The door was small, unassuming, yet there was something about it. Something in the way it seemed to pull at the edges of my thoughts. It was as if the door itself was a threshold to something we were not meant to see, but had no choice but to uncover. "This is it, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and filled with that familiar intensity. "The hidden chamber, the heart of the Carrington secret." My heart skipped a beat as Holmes reached for the door handle. It creaked open slowly, the sound almost too quiet, as if the room beyond had been waiting in perfect silence for us to arrive. Holmes stepped forward first, the lantern's light casting a faint, trembling glow into the darkness. I followed, feeling the air shift as we entered the chamber. The room was small, nestled deep within the bowels of the house, hidden from view by layers of dust and forgotten memories. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old, fragile books and strange artifacts. But it was the centerpiece of the room that caught my attention. In the center of the chamber stood an altar made of stone, ancient and worn with time. It was adorned with strange symbols, carvings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. A feeling of unease washed over me as I took in the sight. This was no ordinary room, no ordinary altar. There was something about it, something that spoke of rituals, of power, and of a pact made long ago. Holmes moved forward, his eyes scanning the altar with the same quiet intensity I had seen when he first uncovered the scroll. He placed the lantern down carefully on a nearby table, his hands moving toward the stone slab at the center of the room. He brushed away the dust, revealing what lay beneath. It was a book, large, bound in what appeared to be ancient leather, its surface worn with the passage of time. The book was open, but the pages were filled with more of those strange symbols, the same that had appeared on the scroll. Holmes turned the pages slowly, his fingers lightly tracing the markings, as if seeking some hidden message buried within the text. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice barely a whisper, "this book is the key to understanding the power the Carringtons have guarded for generations. This is where it all began." I stepped closer, my gaze fixed on the book. I could feel the weight of its history pressing down on us, the knowledge contained within its pages both a blessing and a curse. Holmes began to read aloud, his voice calm, but filled with an undercurrent of tension. "It speaks of a ritual," he murmured. "A ritual performed long ago, in exchange for power. Power that was bound to the very land the Carringtons controlled. The book describes a pact made with an ancient force, one that would grant them wealth, influence, and immortality. But the price was steep, sacrifice, and the one who held the power was bound to it for all eternity." I could feel a shiver run through me as I listened to Holmes's words. The ritual, the pact. It was beginning to make sense, but the weight of it was unbearable. The Carringtons had not merely made a deal for riches, they had traded their very souls, their lives, for something much darker. The key to the family's power, Holmes continued, was the keeper of the secret. One member of the family would be chosen to hold the knowledge, to guard the pact, and over the generations, the power would pass from one to the next, each generation bound by the same bloodline, the same dark promise. I swallowed hard, the truth settling in. And Harold, he was the one who uncovered it, wasn't he? Holmes nodded, his gaze distant. Yes, Watson. Harold Carrington uncovered the secret, and in doing so, he became a threat to the family's carefully maintained power. He had to be silenced. I felt a rush of coldness sweep over me. Harold had known too much, uncovered something the Carringtons could not afford to lose. His disappearance, his search for the truth, it had cost him dearly. And now I realized Miss Carrington herself was in grave danger. Holmes carefully closed the book, his face etched with the gravity of what we had uncovered. We have only one choice left, Watson. We must find Miss Carrington before it's too late. The chamber felt heavier now, as though the weight of the centuries-old pact had come alive around us. The altar, the book, the symbols, it was all part of a dark legacy that the Carringtons had tried to keep hidden, but it was no longer a secret we could ignore. I turned toward the door, my mind racing with the implications of what we had uncovered. "Holmes," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" Holmes's eyes met mine, filled with the same quiet determination I had come to rely on. "We follow the path, Watson. The light has led us here, and now we must finish what we started." As we left the hidden chamber, the air seemed to pulse with an energy that I couldn't quite explain. The truth was out, but the danger had only just begun. Miss Carrington was the key, and if we didn't find her soon, the power that had been locked away for so long would slip beyond our grasp, and perhaps the world itself would pay the price. The house seemed to close in around us as we made our way back into the corridors. The shadows, once mere specters, now felt like living things, silent, watching, waiting for us to make the wrong move. We were close to the end, but the final truth still lay just beyond our reach. The only question now was whether we could unravel it before the darkness consumed us all. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The Carrington estate had never felt more ominous than it did that night. The lantern's flickering light cast long shadows on the walls, its glow barely enough to push back the suffocating darkness that seemed to cling to every corner of the house. The weight of the mystery, of the truth we had uncovered, pressed heavily on my chest. Each step I took felt deliberate, purposeful, yet each one seemed to echo with the realization that we were now walking on the very edge of something much darker, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Holmes moved ahead of me, his every movement precise, his sharp gaze scanning the house with that familiar intensity. But there was a tension in the air around him, an awareness that something important was about to unfold, something that would either bring us closer to salvation or lead us into the very heart of darkness. I felt it too. The whispers had started again, faint but unmistakable, curling at the edges of my hearing. They were softer now, almost like a warning, urging us forward, yet pulling us deeper into the mystery. The truth had always been just out of reach, but now it felt closer than ever before. I knew that whatever we were about to uncover, whatever the final revelation was, would change everything. Holmes paused at the base of the grand staircase, his eyes narrowing as he studied the path ahead. The house was still. Too still. An unnatural silence had settled over everything. Even the usual creaks and groans of the old mansion seemed to have ceased, as though the house itself were holding its breath. "This is it, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low and steady, but laced with an undercurrent of something else, something deeper. The final piece of the puzzle, the last step toward uncovering the truth. I nodded, my heart racing. We had already come so far, through the hidden chambers, the cryptic messages, the ancient pact, and now we stood on the precipice of it all. Everything was about to be revealed. The Carringtons' dark legacy, Harold's disappearance, Miss Carrington's fate, it all led us here, to this very moment. Holmes moved toward the large oak doors at the end of the hall, his steps echoing in the silence. The door, old and worn, stood as a final barrier between us and the truth. As Holmes reached for the handle, I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on us. Every mystery, every question, all of it converging in this one moment. With a slow, deliberate motion, Holmes turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a room I had never seen before. The walls were lined with strange symbols, the same markings we had encountered in the ancient scrolls and books, their shapes twisted and unfamiliar. The air inside was thick with the scent of age and decay, as if this room had been untouched for centuries. As we stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the altar. It stood at the center of the room, draped in dark velvet, its surface worn with time. Strange candles burned on either side, their flames dancing in a breeze I could not feel. On the altar lay a book, ancient and bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed with age. Holmes moved toward the altar, his eyes fixed on the book. There was no hesitation in his movements, only the quiet determination that had driven him throughout this entire case. He reached for the book, his fingers brushing the surface as if in reverence, before carefully opening it. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, as Holmes began to read aloud, his voice carrying a quiet weight, the words filling the room like a distant murmur. "The power shall remain hidden until the blood of the last heir is shed, for only through sacrifice can the pact be completed. The keeper of the secret shall be bound to the land, and the legacy shall continue." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as the words settled in my mind. The blood of the last heir? Sacrifice? The truth was clearer now, yet still, it remained shrouded in a veil of danger and fear. Holmes closed the book gently, his face a mask of concentration. "This," he said, his voice soft but firm, "is what Harold Carrington uncovered. He knew that the last heir, Miss Carrington, would be the final piece of the puzzle. The sacrifice, the pact, was meant to continue with her, but she too sought the truth." I swallowed hard, the weight of it all crashing down on me. The Carringtons had been guarding this dark secret for generations, their wealth and power built on a pact that demanded a terrible price. And now, Miss Carrington was at the heart of it. She was the final key, the one who could either preserve the legacy or break it forever. "But why would Harold disappear?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Why wouldn't he tell Miss Carrington what he had discovered? Holmes glanced up from the book, his expression unreadable. "Because, Watson, Harold knew that the truth was a dangerous thing. To uncover it was to risk everything, his life, his sister's, the very foundation of the Carrington legacy. The moment he learned of the pact, he became a threat to everything the family had worked for." I felt a deep sadness wash over me. Harold Carrington had not simply gone missing. He had uncovered something he wasn't meant to, something so powerful that it had consumed him, forcing him to disappear before he could warn anyone else. Holmes's eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something approaching regret in his gaze. The power, Watson, has always been the Carringtons' curse. Their wealth, their influence. It was never truly theirs. It was bound to the land, to the pact they made so long ago. And now, it is Miss Carrington's burden to carry. I nodded slowly, my thoughts swirling with everything we had uncovered. The whispers, the locket, the ritual. The truth was more complex, more dangerous than I had imagined. Miss Carrington, the last heir, was the key to it all, and whatever decision she made would determine the future of the Carrington legacy. Holmes looked up, his expression hardening. We must find her, Watson. We cannot allow this legacy to continue, to claim another life in exchange for power. Miss Carrington must be freed from this pact, or the darkness will consume her, as it has consumed all who have come before her. We turned toward the door, the weight of our mission clear in our minds. The truth had been revealed, but it had come at a cost. We had uncovered the dark legacy of the Carrington family, but now we had one final task: to save the last heir from the fate that had been sealed for her long ago. The house seemed to watch us as we stepped out, the air thick with the knowledge that our journey was far from over. The final revelation had come, but the danger was far from over. The shadows that had once been distant now pressed in closer, and I knew that whatever came next, we could never turn back. The final chapter of this mystery was yet to be written, and the path ahead would be the most perilous of all.